For 12 winters, the old bear returned like clockwork, always to the same clearing, always to the same man. He had been just a cub when they found each other, both broken, both abandoned. Together, they healed in the silence of the forest. And every year, without fail, the bear came back, until this one. This year, the bear arrived limping. Slower. Sadder. And when he reached the cabin porch, he didn't ask for food or warmth. He just leaned in, and hugged the man who had raised him. Then he turned, without a sound, and vanished into the trees. The man waited. Days passed. Then weeks. But the bear never returned. What the man finds next, deep in the forest, near their old place, will bring you to tears. Because sometimes, the hardest goodbye is the one wrapped in a memory, and a hug. The snow was already ankle-deep when Thomas Whitaker heard the sound. A sharp, desperate cry echoing through the trees. Not a human voice. Not quite an animal's either. He pulled on his boots, grabbed his lantern, and stepped into the howling wind. The cry came again, higher this time, raw and panicked. He followed it past the woodpile, through the thinning pines, until he found it. A cub. Barely the size of a medium dog, the bear lay crumpled in the snow. One of its hind legs was twisted unnaturally. Blood crusted in its fur. Its eyes, dark wide, met his. Not wild. Not threatening. Just scared. Thomas didn't ask himself what to do. Instinct overrode thought. He removed his coat, wrapped the cub gently, and carried it home like a child. That winter was long. The storm was relentless, and so was the cub's pain. Thomas splinted the leg using old books, soft towels, and the steady hands of a man who had once been a father. He never named the bear. But he spoke to him. Told him stories. About the wife he lost. The son who never came home. The wars, the silence, the ache that never really left. The cub listened. And when the snows finally melted in spring, the bear limped out the back door and disappeared into the woods. Thomas thought that was the end. He was wrong. Thomas didn't expect to see the bear again. But on the first snowfall of the next winter, there it was. Standing in the clearing behind the cabin, watching from the edge of the trees. Bigger now. Stronger. The limp had faded. But its eyes were the same, dark, knowing, gentle. Thomas stepped out onto the porch, holding a bowl of leftover stew. The bear didn't move. He placed the bowl at the base of the steps and sat down in his rocker. After a long pause, the bear approached. Cautious. Silent. It ate without looking at Thomas, until it was done. Then slowly, it raised its head and looked at him. It stayed the night, curled under the pine near the woodpile. And in the morning, it was gone again. That became the pattern. Every winter, the bear returned. Not just for food, but for something else. A presence. A ritual. A connection neither man nor animal could explain. Thomas never tried to tame it. Never caged it. He never spoke about it to anyone either, not that anyone ever visited anymore. People in town called him strange. Reclusive. A man living with ghosts. Maybe he was. But every winter, for 12 years, that bear returned. Sometimes for an hour. Sometimes for days. And always on the first snow. The bear grew into a giant, easily 8 feet tall when upright, nearly 1,000 pounds of muscle and fur. But around Thomas, he was careful. Gentle. The kind of gentle that only comes from trust. Thomas grew older too. His hair grayed, then thinned. His hands stiffened. His breathing slowed. But every winter, he waited on that porch with a thermos of tea and 2 mugs. One for him. One for the bear. And every time, the bear came. Until the final year. It was colder than usual that year. The snow arrived early, thick, silent, and unrelenting. Thomas, now in his late 70s, struggled more to gather firewood. His joints ached, and some mornings he stayed in bed longer than he liked. But when the first flurries began to fall, he was out there on the porch, wrapped in his heavy coat, tea steaming beside him. Waiting. The bear didn't come. Not that day. Not the next. Not even by the end of the week. Thomas tried not to worry. He'll come, he whispered to the empty woods. He always comes. Then, late one night, he heard a sound. A dragging step. A rustle. He opened the door and there, just beyond the light of the porch, stood the bear. Solitary. Massive. But this time, different. His coat was matted. His movements, slow. There was blood fresh, staining his right flank. Thomas stepped forward. "You're hurt." The bear didn't flinch. Instead, he lowered himself until he was resting at Thomas's feet. And then something happened that had never happened before. The bear leaned in and pressed his massive head gently against the man's chest. Thomas, stunned, placed both hands on the creature's fur. A moment passed. And then another. He held the bear like he would have held a grieving child. It wasn't just a gesture. It was a goodbye. When the bear rose, he looked into Thomas's eyes one last time. And then, without limping, without sound, he turned and walked into the snow-covered forest. Thomas stood there long after he disappeared. His tea went cold. And for the first time in 12 years, he wept. The next day, Thomas knew something was wrong. He packed a small satchel, water, bread, an old wool blanket, and stepped into the forest. His legs didn't carry him as fast as they once had, but he followed the tracks, deep impressions in the snow, spaced far apart. The bear hadn't stopped all night. 4 hours, Thomas walked. The wind howled through the trees. He passed the stream where they'd first seen deer together, the hill where the bear once rolled in wildflowers like a child, and the grove where it always rested in spring. Then, near a hollow cedar tree, the prince stopped. And Thomas saw him. The bear lay curled beneath the roots of the great tree, half covered in snow, like he had placed himself in the arms of the earth. He didn't move. Thomas dropped to his knees beside him. There was no blood now, only stillness. He placed a hand on the bear's head, fingers sinking into fur now stiff with frost. And in the silence of that forest, surrounded by trees they had once explored together, he whispered, "Thank you for coming back. For every winter. For every year I didn't think I could survive." He stayed there until the sky turned violet. And before he left, Thomas did something he hadn't done in a long time. He reached into his satchel and pulled out a small wooden carving he'd made long ago, a bear with one paw raised. He placed it in the snow beside his old friend. Then he rose, leaned on his cane and walked away, leaving behind the forest, the hollow tree, and the only goodbye that ever truly mattered. Winter passed slowly that year. Thomas didn't leave his cabin much. The forest felt different, quieter, lighter somehow, as if a great presence had finally laid down its weight. Neighbors came by less and less. He didn't mind. His heart was full of memories, tender, powerful ones that didn't need retelling. But he still set out 2 cups of tea every snowfall. One for him. One for the bear. One spring afternoon, a young wildlife ranger knocked on his door. She had heard the stories about the old man and the bear. Most folks in town thought it was a myth. "I just wanted to ask," she said shyly, "was it true? Did the bear really come back every year?" Thomas smiled softly, his eyes watering as he nodded. "Yes," he said. "He came. He listened. He stayed. And when it was time, he said goodbye." She paused. "Why do you think he came back?" Thomas looked out at the pines beyond his porch, where the wind whispered through the trees. "Because I think," he said, "we were both lost. And in the silence, we found each other." That night, as Thomas sipped his tea beside the empty chair, he didn't cry. He smiled. Because even in the bear's absence, he wasn't alone. Love had never left. It had simply walked beside him, in fur and silence, through every snow-covered year. And in that final hug, the bear had given him the greatest gift of all.